A season of change is here. I'm recording this on Friday, July the 30th, and my once very good Chicago Cubs have now been gutted, trading away their entire core. That is the vibe for me this Friday, July the 30th, everybody. You all don't care, but you should care about gold finding its footing. The juniors could be back. The sector rotation Mr. Hodge told you about seems to be accelerating. Crypto looks like it's back. Mr. Hodge called that bottom beautifully. We'll talk Fed policy. We'll talk Simone Biles and trigger a couple of you delicate snowflakes out there. We'll talk the FBI, the Delta variant, vaccines, asteroids, the size of pyramids, all sorts of stuff. I am Gerardo Del Real, and this is episode 128 of Bizarro World. I'm here with my co-host, the witty, the thinking hunter, the defender of everything anti-Fed policy, Mr. Nick Hodge. How are you, sir?
I'm doing pretty good, Gerardo. The market calls have been accurate, as you say, and it's been fun to execute in the market. So I'm happy to talk about that. How's it going? Sorry about your Cubs.
You know, the cycles of change, right? We talked a bit off air. It happens quickly. You know, we went from a first place team about a month ago to complete rebuild status. And so, yeah, my next trip to Wrigley won't be quite as fun as it used to be, but let's see how things shake out. Let's get to the markets. Gold closed right around that 1814 level. I noticed that several institutions and funds, some well-known ones, seem to be rotating back into gold. It's something we chatted a bit about last week. We should probably have a further discussion on that. No coincidence that the 10-year is back down lower, and you know, in large part because the Fed told us what the Fed will continue to tell us for the next few years. This is the predictable policy that you can come to expect. And that will consist of multi-trillion-dollar bills, whether it's infrastructure from the politician side of it, or easy, cheap money, especially for the very well-off amongst us, Nick, from the Fed. So I think, you know, that combination of economic and monetary policy bodes really, really well for gold. You've been spot on with your calls. Let me get your take on gold. What are you seeing? How's it feeling?
I think gold still looks good as long as, you know, rates continue to break down. There's a lot of what you called wonkiness in the system this week, and we can talk about that. I guess I'd want to talk about the gold equities first, which seem to believe that there's a rotation on. I told you 2 weeks ago I was buying Kinross at $6. Well, Kinross is $6.66 here stock here today, right? And so we've seen good earnings come out of Kirkland Lake, and we've seen some of the bigger companies start to move. So they seem to think that this rotation is real. The larger markets, the bond yields that you mentioned, and gold are still, I think, taking their time figuring it out, right? It's not all happening at once. And I guess I would point to the 2-year instead of the 10-year, which I was mentioning back in June, actually, on this podcast. And it's not obviously yielding more than the 10-year, but its yields are moving higher faster. And so that's wonkiness is the best I can describe it, because I'm not a bond king, and I'm not a central banker. And honestly, I don't even know if they could understand it. Or explain it simply, right? The repo market is, back over $1 trillion. These banks seemingly want to park this cash with the Fed. The 2-year yield is inflating, like I said. And I think there's still a bit of a wait and see approach here. Utilities were doing well this week, showing a bit of that defensiveness, something else I was saying last week. And so, I'm not sure if that's the answer you were looking for, but gold, it certainly didn't break down, and it looks like it still wants to go higher, and other commodities continuing to inflate as well. What did I see this week? Tin at record highs, for example. Last week we were talking about coffee, and this week it's tin. Like, these commodities are continuing to just play round robin with their inflation, and it's going to go to gold, like I say, as long as these rates remain down.
Agreed. And look, you mentioned the gold equities. You mentioned Kinross, a producer, of course. Let's get into some of the juniors. I mentioned Chicana last week. I thought that Chicana was a compelling opportunity at 30 cents. And look, here we are 7 days later. That thing closed at 43 cents today. Nick had itself a hell of a week on good results. But we've seen a market in the juniors that doesn't reward good results. There's still a lot of names out there that present pretty compelling speculations. Revival Gold is a name I'll give you for free, right? Magna Gold still another one I'll give you for free. But look, Chicana intersected 12 meters of 27.39% copper and 967.7 grams per ton silver. You can add 0.38 grams per ton gold at the Soledad project in Peru. Pretty damn good numbers, pretty damn good market response. It was encouraging to see that. Other notable moves in the junior space. Probe Metals had itself a week. It went from 170 to it closed at 199 today. Just today it was up 11% on some pretty good volumes. I could continue on. Even laggards. I mentioned New Placer Dome Gold a few weeks back. That was up some 20% this week. So the moves that I'm seeing, I typically don't see them at the end of July and early August. These are moves that typically we see when everyone is back from vacation, right? Right after Labor Day is typically when people wake up. But it seems like these juniors are discounted so much that people actually are out there bargain hunting. And that bodes really well if gold behaves itself. Copper certainly is behaving itself right back to 441 and much higher in the future. So
it's transitory, totally fucking transitory.
Yeah, transitory. And I know we go on a rant every week about it, so I don't even want to get going on that again. But look, let's talk inflation, right? It rose 3.5% in June, year over year, and that's not a little bit. And of course, we know because we've talked about it a lot on this podcast that real inflation is much higher than that. Delta variant, COVID cases. We talked about it a bit last week, Nick. Are you worried in the second half about earnings slowing down as a result of the Delta variant? Or do you think we're peaking right now and are actually where we were when we caught the second wave back in February, where February and March tended to be the peak, right?
Can I talk about juniors for a second first?
You could talk about whatever you want, Mr. Hodge.
I won't forget to mention it. I wrote it down. Chicana specifically, I think you've got a bit of I won't maybe say improving political situation, but at least clarity to a political situation unfolding that I think is helping that jurisdiction. I would have pointed to Revival as well as something that's still significantly undervalued, and also as a case that the juniors weren't all rising in step, right? If I were to look at the GDXJ, for example, which I know doesn't include the real tiny explorers, but just as a barometer, it would want to let me just pull it up for a second. It would want to go, I think, above $50 to confirm like a real move up, for example. And so it's getting close. I mean, it put in, let's say it caught itself in the low 40s at 43 and has turned around and it's at 45, 46 today. But if you scroll all the way out, I guess is what I was going to say. Let me do that for a second. Yeah, you get out to about, break it out of $50, which is it's starting to get up to yet. So what I would say is, still time for that smaller end of the sector to catch up, which is how it typically goes, which means there's opportunity left, I guess, is what I was going to say. And sorry, now I'll talk about your question about inflation and earnings. I think that the world shut down last year, which is something that we've talked about a lot, and so you had a lot of numbers coming, year over year numbers that looked really, really good. Some of the fastest growing profits, just like we had some of the worst quarter over quarter numbers before that, right? And so I think that slows down as the reopening has now been in effect in the U.S. at least for a couple of weeks, if not months, in most locations, and so the roller coaster is not going to keep going straight up, right? Trees don't go to the sky, and you can already see that how earnings are starting to quote unquote disappoint, right? If you look at FactSet numbers or whatever, S&P net earnings, while they set a record in for Q1, are they're still good in Q2, but they're not as good, right? And so not as good is important when inflation is still fucking ripping, right? Because you need the growth to keep up with the inflation, or else you get what do you get, Gerardo? You get the stagflation, or you get a rotation, which is another thing that's driving what you and I were talking about there. And so and then you get wild cards, right? Because you mentioned Delta, I think is how we got into this. And so, I don't know, just this week, the CDC said they're advising people, even vaccinated people, to wear masks indoors again. I don't know what the vibe is in Texas. Here in Washington, the governor echoed those sentiments. He didn't say they were going to be required, but he did say they're recommended. And so, we'll see. You've got a kid going to college in the fall. Or they have to wear masks. I've been seeing more and more announcements about that, and we'll see how people react to this. You've got these. Sorry, now I'm just ranting, but a lot of things that are new things, right? Breakthrough infections and people that have been vaccinated, being contagious after they've been infected with these variants and things like that. And so, a lot of stuff to work through here in the late summer, which is typically a slow time.
A lot of stuff to work through. It's going to be an interesting start to Q4. There's a lot of Q3 left. A lot of companies still doing some really, really good work out there. Good to see some movement. Let's leave it there. S&P 500, 6 months in a row. Of course, it's easy to make money when you have every politician just dying to spend it, right? And willing to print it. And, we have eviction moratoriums that are being extended. And, we got pleads for forgiveness on student loan debt. And we've talked about that in the past. But it seems like whether you're on the right or the left right now, if you're a politician, it's just a game of handout. Everybody's just looking to hand out whatever they can hand out. And it doesn't really matter which side of the aisle you're on. It's just different gifts for different people. But the policy is the same on either side. Am I off on that? Does it feel different to you, Nick, or does it look different to you?
I mean, the right tries to say they aren't doing it, but obviously are in their own ways. And there was bipartisan agreement this week to move the infrastructure bill forward. So obviously some willingness to spend there. I think if you had any notion that Donald Trump was gonna, rein in the budget or the deficit of anything like that, those fantasies or dreams have got to be out the window after you see how the deficit can continue to increase under his watch. And so, unless you're completely deranged, I mean, you have to see that both sides are wanton spenders and willing to write checks. Trump even wanted to sign the checks personally, remember?
He did. And God, you mentioned unless you're absolutely deranged. And, we say that and we don't mean that in a derogatory way. We mean that in a very literal way. But there are a lot of people that clearly are willing to believe anything along narrative or party lines. And the most recent one, I don't know if you saw this, but there's a Parkland school survivor, right? The mass shooting that we had down in Florida a few years back. There's a teen who said he was one of the people that was shot. And the kid says he's being traumatized because his father, a QAnon believer, believes the massacre was a hoax. I mean, I don't know if my kid got shot. I don't know what it would take for me, other than me being deranged, for me to believe that the whole thing was a hoax. It's a bit worrisome. I don't want to say scary. It's worrisome to me how easily led A lot of people are. And I know the media sensationalizes things because that's what gets clicks. And I read the story, so obviously it's working. But yeah. It's we need critical thinking back in the schools. We need critical thinking and some common sense. More of it in society. I think we could all do better with it. And yeah, any thoughts on that, Nick?
I mean, I did see the story. I think that it's easy to get wrapped up in all sorts of narratives and adopt that as a worldview. And you mentioned clickbait journalism. I mean, you don't get really any sort of central, coherent, non-politicized reporting unless you really look for it or are willing to pay for quality journalism, which I'm not sure the mainstream populace is doing. And so, no, easy to see how you get caught up in these narratives, whatever they are, right? Sex cults we've discussed on this podcast, all sorts of stuff, right? Whatever it is. And so, not a lot to add, I guess, other than those points, but continue to be in a really polarized environment, and one where, and this is important, I think, the politicians or those that people vote for whatever reason are all too willing to embrace that polarization and non-reality and really that sense of clickbait journalism to advance their own agendas or whatever they may be, instead of truly doing things that are the will of the people. And so, yeah, it's one big club and you ain't in it. And I think they play a lot of games to keep people polarized with the media, as you alluded to.
And I think, look, the hearings that we saw this week regarding the January 6th insurrection and everything that happened, I think is a clear example of that, right? When the Black Lives Matter protests were happening, there was so much support, for Blue Lives Mattering, right? And for police, and for the bravest amongst us that keep our community safe. And it was really, really, it pissed me off a little bit to see politicians that have Secret Service protection and sit behind desk and just criticize behind a screen or behind a desk. It really pissed me off to see a couple of the officers that were there January 6th and actually fighting back and save some lives and doing the right things, not the ones that let people in, the ones that actually were there about it, right? It pissed me off to see politicians tweeting and media people tweeting that these men were liars. They were liars because they didn't fit the narrative of what happened on January 6th, which, even that's been polarized, right? Even that's like, you either believe that it was the right thing to do and necessary to save our democracy, or you think it was one of the biggest threats we've seen to our democracy here in recent times. And so, just bizarro world, Nick. It's crazy times. I don't know if you caught any of those hearings, but yeah, that was pretty cringy.
It was cringy. I saw the gentleman slam the desk and talk about how he had been drug into the crowd and repeatedly electrocuted again. We saw this in real time. I mean, the fucking revolution's being televised. It's 2021. We saw them beating police officers, dragging them down from their posts. We saw the officer lead the enraged crowd away from the Senate chamber, right? Like, this stuff was on social media and being displayed in real time. And so, we've talked about this a little bit, but yeah, to deny what happened. And, I'm not sure what level of threat it was to the democracy, but I am sure that it happened. I saw it with my own eyes. And so when you see people try to sit up there and say that it wasn't, especially in the context of the police, as you mentioned, is obviously disingenuous. And then, of course, you have to talk about the blue line that they're stepping across, right? Because there were a lot of police in attendance at the January 6th event and not in uniform, right? As members of the crowd. This isn't made up. This is well documented, right? And so you can talk about the insignia militias, or you can talk about like the blue line patches and Black Rifle Coffee Company patches that were seen and documented in the crowd, and the let's say worldview that speaks to. To a certain extent, the police cohort, the blue line bumper sticking having crowd is the January 6th insurrectionist crowd, right? And now I'm going to talk about Florida for a second, because there was a story out of Florida
always Florida
that I took the time to read because it caught my eye about the law enforcement and the KKK. And so I read it, and it turns out that there's law enforcement in the KKK, but there was a black gentleman who was in prison for a misdemeanor that I guess a prison guard kept blowing smoke in his face, blowing smoke in his face. And the black guy told him to stop. And eventually just started fighting the prison guard, right? And in the fight, sorry, I'm making this a long story, but he bit the prison guard. The inmate was black, the prison guard was white. And so the prison guard had to undergo all this testing, right? Because he got bit by an inmate, hepatitis, HIV, all this testing. And it turns out that the prison guard who was bitten was in the KKK, and ultimately conspired when this black gentleman was released from prison to have him murdered. And turns out there was an FBI informant in his, I don't know if they're chapters or whatever they are, sects or whatever his group was of the KKK in Florida, and was able to record them. And they were arrested by the FBI, right? There was, I believe, 3 prison guards who were just in this one Ku Klux Klan cell that conspired to murder this gentleman were prison guards in Florida. And so the FBI went to Florida and said, hey, you've got a KKK problem in your law enforcement agencies. And Florida said, yes, so? And so, and that was like the end of the story. Like Florida just declined to investigate. And so, I don't know. That's what I thought about when you were talking about those hearings.
Yeah. Look, let me go back to my my comment about the insurrection and the riots on the Capitol being a threat to the democracy. The threat, just to be clear from my perspective, is the precedent, precedent, that it sets. And I can tell you that being from and having family in a town in Mexico where the people that are most willing to exercise violence and have the best access to weapons, they control large parts of the country, obviously, and then sure in the heck are doing a good job of keeping the town locked down, so much so that I had an aunt that passed away, as you know, a couple of weeks ago, and I didn't feel comfortable going. And so when you have a scene like what happened on January the 6th, and it's that close to senators and officers dying, there's nothing that says that a more better organized group next time with better weaponry and less callous for life couldn't succeed in at the very least making that a much deadlier situation that can inspire others. And we see this around the world, right? We see groups of all sorts of different backgrounds that are willing to behead and are willing to bomb. And we've seen civil wars that go on for decades on end, right? Everything from Ireland to the Middle East to Mexico, you name it. The precedent that image of that insurrection sets, to me, is a threat to the democracy, because there is no guarantee in a future that there won't be a better organized group that feels the same way about the state of the country and what they're willing to do for it. So I wanted to clarify that comment.
Sure. And I guess the scariness in that law enforcement for me is we've seen their willingness to trample citizens' rights, right?
Yep.
To push people down, to beat them up in the streets, to kneel on their backs until they're dead, whatever it is, right? And then increasingly, we're seeing that group is choosing sides, right, politically. And so what you then have is the law enforcement backing a political ideology, and that's as un-American as it gets.
Absolutely. And let's talk a little bit more on law enforcement. Let's talk about Simone Biles, which triggered a lot of people who don't know. One of my favorite shows is The Ozarks on Netflix, right? This little lady in there that acts her ass off, and she has a phrase like, I don't know shit all about nothing, right? And so there's a lot of people out there that know shit all about nothing when it comes to being a gymnast. And so for those not familiar, Simone Biles is, the greatest gymnast to ever do it. She is so good that she's judged differently by judges because she is inventing new routines, new moves that had never been seen before, right? And so she's somewhat penalized for that because there's just no system of judging certain moves because they had never been done before. Anyhow, she is competing. She's in the Olympics. She was in the middle of a routine, and halfway into her routine, she's in the air, and she describes it as getting the twisties. She got lost in the air, right? And so I'm not a gymnast, but I know that everybody that is a gymnast that I read online says, look, that is when you're competing at that level, and when that happens to you, not only is it the best thing for the team for her to back away and say, hey, I'm off. Like I'm off. Don't want to get injured. You guys go try to go get that medal, which the team did. We ended up with the silver, did a great job. But she could have seriously hurt herself. When you're spinning and jumping and you're as high up as she was. And so I could not understand the venom that this young lady got for making a decision about her physical and mental health and recognizing that the best shot that her teammates had was for her to sit back and let her teammates get in there and go take care of business, especially if it's in a situation like that. And then we go to law enforcement, and you got to remember that Simone Biles is the last competing victim of Nassar, right? The doctor, Larry Nassar, the doctor who was sentenced to 40 to 175 years in prison after he pleaded guilty to sexual assault and possession of child pornography. And this is a story I've been wanting to get to for a couple of weeks. I've mentioned it in passing. It keeps getting away from me. But, I want to talk about it this week a little bit because we talked about law enforcement and we talked about, the potential consequences of having law enforcement that's corrupt, having law enforcement that, isn't there to uphold the oath that they're taking, but just to further whatever interests they have. And so when this story broke that, and this was the Justice Department, which did a good job with this, that 70 girls were abused by the doctor after the first reports of abuse came to the FBI in July of 2015. It almost physically made me sick, Nick. I was so angry and am just incredibly sad for these young ladies. It's very consequential for our country that the rule of law which sets us apart from most countries, right? It's what attracts capital here. It's what attracts investment. It's why you and I wouldn't be as comfortable launching a new venture in China, because we don't know if we would get to keep it, right? And here in America, if we do the right things, if we pay our taxes, there's a very high likelihood that the law would protect us as long as we're doing right. When the law isn't doing right, it has terrible, often tragic consequences. And I am sickened by the report that FBI employees not only didn't respond to the claims by not investigating, but they also lied to other organizations that were, in order to cover up. This is their line, the agents, in order to cover up their failure to investigate the crimes that now we know clearly happened. And so, we talk a lot on this podcast about holding law enforcement accountable. It's because of the responsibility law enforcement bears. And it's one, by the way, that they sign up for. So it's not an anti-law enforcement or anti-government podcast. It's a we want accountability in our society podcast. You commit a crime, you go to prison, you do your time, you reform, do better, you get another opportunity. You don't, there should be consequences. We shouldn't excuse anyone from that level of accountability, including law enforcement. And I hope that the people that covered this up and allowed all these young ladies to get, abused and molested and raped, some people have to go to prison. I still haven't seen any of Epstein's buddies go to prison. Have you? Other than the girlfriend? Anybody?
I've seen a lot of resignations, but not a lot of prison time.
Yeah, a lot of divorces, a lot of very friendly settlements, quiet ones. But I haven't seen much in the way of prison time. So, anyhow, that's my rant on accountability. Let's stick to the Olympics a little bit. Anything to add there, Nick?
I mean, it's important because a couple of things. One is, we champion these police, right? Back the blue, this and that. And I've said time and again that, we want the police to be better,
Absolutely.
I'm not making things up when I say half of crimes, like the cops don't solve, right? Like these aren't some cape-wearing heroes who are out there deterring crime day in and day out. That's not really what police do. And so I think to view them in that way is a bit misguided. I think there's, other ways to reduce crime than backing the blue and militarizing it. And then that transfers here to the FBI, right? They failed. I mean, let's call it what it is. They failed in their duty. They failed to investigate. They failed to catch the bad guy. I mean, that's like your one fucking job, right? And so they failed at that, right? As is often the case, as they fail to solve half of like major violent crimes, right? And so let's improve that if we want to back the blue, and you don't improve that by giving them immunity. Like that's not what makes them solve more crimes, right? The stuff that we're seemingly arguing back and forth against aren't what makes cops better and isn't what makes citizens safer. So that's one piece of it. And then I would just say that American institutions are in need of reform. Obviously, that's what a fourth turning is about, and I would point at the Catholic Church, right, as evidence that we just had the first cardinal charged or convicted, right?
From 74. It took fucking 50 years.
Insane. The first, and I know there's been priests charged, but the first cardinal charged. Come on. And it's the same thing with cops, right? What do? Send the priest to another diocese, put him in another state, right? Same thing with cops. He gets fired for misconduct in one county. He can go over to the next county and get a job. Doesn't go on his permanent record. And so that's sort of the stuff that needs to change and needs to get called out. And, I've led plenty of horses to water, but you can't make them drink, Gerardo.
You cannot. Did you see the story about the Norwegian athletes that got fined for not wearing the sexy bikini bottoms?
Is this the one that Pink is covering the tab for?
Hey, I love Pink, by the way. Shout out to Pink. Not that I know her, but if you happen to come across this podcast, we love you, Pink. You're amazing. This was fucking crazy. It's 2021. We're talking about Cardinals from the 70s finally getting fucking arrested and charged for raping young boys. And you think, okay, well, archaic institution, right? And then you fast forward to 2021 here with the Olympics, and they're fucking fining women for not wearing the bikini bottoms. It's insane.
Gotta keep them ratings up.
Oh God. We had an asteroid the size of the Pyramid of Gaza that flew by the Earth. Good God, Nick. All sorts of crazy shit.
There's so much stuff happening. There's a new moons are forming in outer space. We might have discovered.
Do they wobble?
That's funny. They're gonna get monkey disease if they do.
Pretty monkey disease.
But yeah, there's new moons in outer space. What else did I read this week? If you want to just talk about random space stories, we might have discovered a new form of matter, and so that's quite significant. But yeah, though these don't even register anymore.
Aliens, new planets, new forms of matter. Who cares, right? Who cares? Another billionaire trying to get to, out of here. Bezos was denied, and his company Blue Origin was denied its protest on the moon lander contract. I don't know if you saw that. That just broke here a little.
Well, he said he would cover the $2 billion, and they said no.
They said no. Yeah, they said no. They that contract went to the other billionaire that
Musk. Yeah.
Can't wait to get the hell out of here, right? Elon, right? So yeah. It's a $2.9 billion contract. Obviously, there's a space race, and this one is a partnership that's private and public. So interesting to see how things develop on that front. But you're right, the pace of the news and the stuff that's going on. There's so much. There was an 8.2 earthquake in Alaska that barely got any coverage, right? Luckily, it was far away from the population centers, and didn't cause tsunamis or significant loss of life or anything like that. But the faults are active as they always are, and I always worry once they start shaking like that it's going to continue on down. So no, look, there's a lot to look at in the world. It's a lot of instability, and again, always a good time to smile and be nice to someone and try to make someone's day better, because that goes a long way, right?
Absolutely.
And for corporations out there, you know what else goes a long way? Have an AC at the Burger King where you want these kids and these people to work. So did you read the story about the Burger King employees that walked out?
No, I saw they walked out. I didn't know why.
So, they're sitting there for 2 weeks, and there wasn't any AC, and they're hot as hell. And they keep asking for the AC to get fixed, and it didn't get fixed. And so they just put up a sign that said, "We all quit. Sorry for the inconvenience." I thought it was absolutely hilarious. Look, corporations are going to have to start paying up and treating people right. And those that haven't, or those that have done it the wrong way, I think there's some karmic debt to be paid, right?
I wonder if I could follow up on that. I wonder if they got some AC or if they restaffed, because it's quite tough to restaff right now.
That's exactly what the Burger King's general manager, Rachel Flores, said, that low staffing levels made it untenable for her and her employees to keep working there. And so they were just like, look, we're out of here, man. We're out of here. Sorry for the inconvenience. Burger King isn't the most healthy of foods for you anyway, folks. Let's wrap this up by getting your thoughts on the crypto space. Nick, you called the bounce beautifully. We touched on it last week, but 2 weeks ago you were saying that you were buying, and I think you got into Bitcoin right at what, 29, 28, 30?
It was like just over 29.5 when I was awake working one night when it was selling off, and when I went to bed, I pulled up my Coinbase app and it was still under 30, so I started buying. Yeah, and I told you why, because it didn't break down further than that. The previous time we talked,
yep.
I told you it could have gone lower, and then it didn't. So I bought it, and then it ran to 40, is what you're saying. It was up around $40,000 Bitcoin was, and has pulled a little bit back under that. What do I want to say now? I think Ethereum is the cool new kid this week. Ethereum was moving up higher, not in absolute terms, and obviously, but in percentage terms than Bitcoin was, and the narrative surrounding that was that it was becoming more widely adopted, and that it was being viewed as like one of the two main ones that had staying power, Bitcoin and Ether, which of course is what it's been all along. Essentially, the shitcoin's been the shitcoins, and there's Bitcoin and Ether. I mean, it's pretty clear. But it didn't want to break through that 40 or 41,000. And so, weekends are always very interesting for crypto, and gold is moving back up now. So I don't know. I'm certainly not buying more here. I queued up a sell when it was at like 40,000 and a half, and I didn't press the button. And so I don't know. I guess I just got diamond hands right now.
Yeah, it's at 40,237 as we speak. There's still some non-believers out there that don't believe it's sustainable in the short or midterm. For the major U.S. indices to continue to rise alongside cryptos, alongside gold.
I'll tell you what I did buy this week, Gerardo. Sorry to jump in and change the subject. But every time I read a fucking interview that you do with Van, I end up buying a gold coin. And so I bought a nice St. Gaudens this week because Van inspired me to do so. And maybe you can talk about why. But, we've talked about the collectibles here multiple times, the NFTs, the Magic the Gathering cards, the Pokemon cards, the what else? Sculptures of nothing, the farm bills and farm bank scams. We've talked about all this, and so these cards continue to sell at records. You talked to Van this week, and sorry to steal your thunder, but he's sort of I don't know, the bee's knees in the collector's world, right? Co-founded PCGS, Professional Coin Grading Service, and the PSA, the sports one, which does the baseball cards. And so he's talking about how, these Mickey Mantle cards, even ones that aren't grading that well, are going for millions of dollars, and the Honus Wagner cards, and even the, older rare coins. So maybe you can relay some of that, because I thought it was worth recanting it at least a bit.
No, look, the conversations I have with Van, who is the standard. I mean, you called that, he is the bee's knees. He is the standard. Him and his team, literally invented the grading system, right? That these cards and these coins.
The coin I bought was a PCGS coin. Yeah, exactly.
There you go. And so, when we talk about like the who's who, and look, your coin dealer's favorite hero mentor is Van and David Hall Rare Coins. And we'll put a link up for anyone that wants anything from, cool collectibles to baseball cards to comic books. Him and I had an off the record conversation about watches. I love watches, and I've started looking at those as investments. And, he gave me like a half an hour tutorial and primer on watches, and then, sent me some pictures of some recent ones he had purchased. But, we were talking about inflation, and we were talking about a monetary policy and economic policy, and just how bizarro it all is. And, he talked about that Mickey Mantle baseball card. He used to buy those things for $1,000 to $1,500 a card. And then he said in 1988 or 1989, they were selling for $8,000 to $9,000 a card. And the most recent auction sale, 3 weeks ago, sold for I think 2.2 million.
I believe that's right.
Yeah, and he said there's one that they grade a 10, which, you know, it's like a 10 in the real world is like a 10 in the baseball card world, right? Top notch. In the $10 million range. We're not talking from the 1800s to now. We are talking from 1989 when they sold for $8,000 to $9,000 to 2021. These things are selling for 10 million. 10 million. And so look, it's clearly a sign that informed capital, capital that is looking to preserve its wealth.
Right. Yeah. Like it's not dumb money paying $2 million a card, right? I mean, dumb money doesn't have $2 million a card.
Exactly. You know, I've heard stories, and I won't say from who, and I won't say about who, but I've heard stories about billionaires that are on the Forbes list that, you know, have been reported to be worth $3 to $4 billion, and certain people in the know laugh at that number because there's a guy, allegedly, I don't know if it's true, it could be a story, that has warehouses full of Tiffany lamps and every kind of, you know, art, painting, and all the off the record stuff, right? That isn't counted in the net worth that clearly, obviously, is worth a whole heck of a lot more, and will be. And you know, when we talk wealth and we talk rich, you know, Chris Rock has that great line, like, no, you know, I'm not wealthy. You know, wealth is the guy that owns the color blue, right? The rights to that's wealthy. You can pass that down forever. I'm rich, right? And so when I hear these stories, it reminds me, you know, it just reminds me, of just that there's levels to this, and, you know, it keeps you humble for sure. But yeah, look, I asked Van about his wealthy friends and, you know, how they were moving their capital, and you know, his answer to me was, you know, look, I was talking to a gentleman recently, and he was we were going back and forth, and he really wanted this collectible that I had, and he asked me what it would take to buy it off of me, and I gave him some crazy number, and he said, okay, how many can I have? And he responded by saying, well, you don't care about the price? He's like, the price doesn't matter. He goes, eventually, this might be worth infinity in today's dollars, right? Because of the way that things are printed, and the fact that there's like one of the things that he was looking for, or two of those things that he was looking for, and he clearly wanted them both. But it's all relative, I guess, is where I'm going with this. It's all relative. Wealth is relative. The prices for these collectibles, the prices for these junior companies, eventually, I think the price of gold, all these hard assets, if you haven't noticed, people tend to catch a pretty informed bid when we run the kind of experiments monetarily that we're running right now. And unfortunately, that's not a trend that's going to slow down, I don't think, anytime soon. And look, we had coal miners that were outside of New York protesting BlackRock, right? For the same reasons that I was shitting on BlackRock a couple of weeks ago, and because they're coming in and they're buying all the houses and all the condos, and they're gutting out the owner class and making it really hard for those trying to get a head start and do it the right way, to have some upward mobility with real estate and use that as a way to build wealth and increase their net worth. So it's starting to turn, as you mentioned. I don't ever recall coal miners in front of, you know, in New York streets protesting in front of the BlackRock office before. That's new, and I don't think that slows down anytime soon.
Interesting. Yeah, no, the collectibles are fascinating. The coins especially are fascinating, especially when you think about those totals in context of like the estate tax levels and stuff like that. For example, it's very easy to hand down millions in wealth in a briefcase full of coins that is outside of the state's reach, who many view as being increasingly not fiscally responsible, let's say, you know what I mean? And so easy to see why the money goes into those asset classes. And at one point in particular that Van has been saying, and I think is the asset you were talking about, is those St. Gaudens coins that I mentioned. He was saying it was some CEO back in the 80s when gold was at $275 an ounce. These St. Gaudens coins were $2,000 a coin. It's like, I don't know, 0.96 or 0.97 ounces of gold in there. So just about an ounce.
Yep.
But anyway, they were trading at, multiples of what the gold price was. And here we are in 2021. I'm pretty sure this is what Van was saying. And those same St. Gaudens coins are still at $2,100 or $2,200, while gold is not at $275 anymore, but is at $1,800. And so, anyway, I always think about that when I buy gold, because most people think of the Eagles, and I always think about Van saying he would trade in every eagle he's got for some of these older historic pieces, and frankly, they're cooler to look at and hold anyway, and they got just as much gold in there. And you start looking then at the spread, right? Once they become more scarce, I guess is what I wanted to say. And so, no, it's always interesting. Listen to what he has to say.
No, we'll put a link up to that interview, and you're spot on. He mentioned that the premium before was, multiples, as you said, right? 100% premiums, 200% premiums. The premiums right now are like 10%. And, and in his opinion, he said, on the downside, there's not a lot of risk, because like a lot of the junior stocks that have real resources and are real companies and have been sold off during this consolidation, the market has done a pretty efficient job of removing the bulk of the risk. He said the risk may be 2 to 3%. And the upside, in his words, could be pretty dramatic, is what he said. And so, when you hear somebody, exactly. So when you hear a guy like Van Simmons say that the downside is 2 to 3%, and the upside is infinity,
for sure.
Absolutely. You go and you read that interview and you give Mr. Van Simmons a call. We'll put a link up to the interview, and we'll put a link up to David Hall, Rare Coins. But best in the business, and just all of my experiences with him, he's been gracious and generous with his time, and it's always appreciated. So he deserves the plug.
Beauty.
The plug deserves the plug, Nick.
Love it.
That's all I got. Anything else on your mind? Anything you want to get off your chest?
No, that was a good note to wrap up on. The only thing we didn't mention was uranium. Those stocks seem to be doing okay. Cameco reported earnings. Some of the juniors continue to move up from their correction. And so, no, I think that's the only thing we didn't really mention that would be a recurring theme. So I'm good.
We'll save it for next week. That's all I got. I'm going to go lament my once great Chicago Cubs. Yeah, that's all. That's it. This was episode 128 of Bizarro World. I am Mr. Gerardo Del Real, along with my co-host, Mr. Nick Hodge. Say goodbye to everybody, Nick.
See ya.